of the state of Iowa.
Right.
All right, welcome back. So for those of you online, I appreciate you joining. For those in the room, thank you. I want to just real quick for a moment, as I look around, I want to thank Drake for the opportunity to be here and what a beautiful room this is. We talk about risk and being curious. So I was curious at one of our last breaks, and I went and grabbed a book. I thought, okay, what's in these books, right? And we're going to carry a theme forward that I've seen throughout the day into our conversation. It's going to be a little different than what we've seen so far, but it's past, present, and future. Right? So throughout our conversations, we've heard people talk about their past. Some have been education, some of it's been work experience, some of it's been the incidents or the issues that they've seen, present, what they're experiencing right now, and then future. So we're going to carry that into our cybersecurity and our preparedness discussion. But before I go there, my one curious book from the past that I picked up, and I want to make sure that I bring this into the education and student section too, right? So as I opened up this book, wondering what was in this room, I turned to In Partial Fulfillment for the Requirement for the Degree of Masters of Art. And this was from 1969. It was a thesis presented to the Graduate Division of Drake University. 1969 passed, right? I thought, I wonder what they were thinking in 1969. So this thesis was on the detection and isolation of pathogenic members of the bacterial algae from the Des Moines River within the city limits of Des Moines. Sounds a little ESG-ish, right? As I'm flipping through here, we've got emphasizing the need for clean water. Nikoloff in 1967 has predicted the United States will use 500 billion gallons of water per day by the 1980s. 100% of the available water supply today. So it's interesting from a student perspective, the work that you're doing today and the work that people have done in the past, even if it was in 1969, talking about the need for clean water, right, is one of the topics that we talked about here today. So as we're talking about the past in cybersecurity, the present in cybersecurity, and the future, the students, which hopefully we have some in the room and online, are thinking about the work that you're doing today, the events that you're being presented with today, are going to be the things that we're thinking about in the future, and you have the opportunity to influence. So with that, I think we have some slides, and I'm going to first introduce myself. So Tim Soderholm. I'm with Principal Financial Group. I'm a Chief Risk Officer in their Enterprise Risk Management area. I was previously the Chief Risk Officer for the Retirement Division for 7 years. My current role, I have accountabilities for our framework, our governance, prioritization. I own our technology risk management team and our corporate insurance teams. Before then, like I'm talking about the past, I was with Wells Fargo. I started in sales. I'm the risk guy in sales, right? And then I worked into operations and then started building control departments, and I landed in risk. Coming out of college, so hopefully a lot of our students, I didn't know what I wanted to be, right? And my path, obviously, from sales to risk took me different directions, all with curiosity and trying something new and being curious. I've had the wonderful, amazing opportunity to meet this crazy guy sitting next to me over the last probably 3-4 months. We've practiced 4 or 5 times, and even sitting out here, the conversation has went a different way. So it's unscripted. We're going to have a dialogue about past, present, and future, and we're going to start by deconstructing his background and experience, and we're going to use these slides here to help us through that. What we're hoping here, Chris, today is you can talk to us how your experiences in the past have influenced where you are today in the present, and how we should be thinking about cybersecurity and preparedness in the future.
First off, the curveball is pretty cool. It's not a Christmas story, but it is a Christmas story, I guess, as we're ramping up to the holidays. And thanks for having me, Drake University, Kevin, for putting on a good show. This has been great. Let's just get into it. The slide says it all. If you've lived the life that I've lived, and you'll learn more about it as we talk through it, you'll see why humor is a big part of the way I operate. Most of these photos are with humorous intent, and I'll talk through that. I grew up a bootstrap kid in Nashville, Tennessee, found my way into Vanderbilt University via an NROTC scholarship, and ended up joining the Marine Corps as part of that, and was frankly lucky enough to find my way into communications as my career path. And so I got to be one of the first cybersecurity officers in the Marine Corps back in the 90s when cybersecurity was new and inventive. We had just realized, the Marine Corps had just started to realize the power of what they called network-centric warfare, and what that means to be able to conduct telecommunications operations and its enablement of logistics, reconnaissance, surveillance, counterintelligence functionalities, all the way down to targeting and bracketing of weapons control systems. Think about how technologically we are born today in terms of the basic warfighter. Well, that was emerging when I first hit the Corps. And so I got to be the cybersecurity guy at the largest base in the Marine Corps, which is Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. Many of you probably know that area, and got to live through the emergence of the cybersecurity industry. So I've had a couple of chats with some of you in the room today about like, oh, cyber guy, change your passwords. Let me tell you, in 1998, my first order I ever got to give as a young lieutenant was to bring all the constituents of, I think 33,000 Marines are operating out of Camp Lejeune, including 2nd Marine Division, 26th Marine Expeditionary Unit, as well as all the base contingents, into a room, anybody that owns a computer or runs some sort of technology service, and explain to them that we've screwed up. Everything that we've plugged into the internet, things like routers and telecommunications capabilities, are not managed centrally. They're not managed well. And if you've left a default password on, which, by the way, everybody knows what they are if you read the manual, the enemy is logging into them and changing routes or monitoring traffic. And oh my God. So if it's got a blinking light on it, go find the password and change it. Like, how illuminating that was.
So past, clearly in the present, we don't have a password problem.
Right. So what year is it now? How long ago was that? And what are we doing today in terms of how we manage our technology platforms? We now have emerged versions of this cyber risk today, and that with the proliferation of cloud security or cloud services and the ability to have the requirement to have an account for everything, password sprawl, credential stuffing. These types of problems are still largely unsolved, with a lot of wonderful technology solutions to help with it. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to good governance, discipline in how you run your systems, good hygiene around how you manage them.
You know, you said credential stuffing. Will you give us the dummy version?
What is that?
Stuffing. But then I want you to talk about future of credential stuffing.
Yeah.
We got things like AI.
Right.
And while passwords, you could go find a blinking light before and just change it. What do we do when credential stuffing gets compounded by the power of this awesome AI capability?
Yeah. Well, like and I'm glad this next talk's I'm gonna scare you to death, and then they're gonna tell you why it's gonna be awesome. How many of you have a phone that has a keychain on it, in terms of where you keep all your passwords? How many of you look at that and see how many of those passwords gets the alert that says you're using the same password? All of you have that, right? Well, that means that one password, if it gets stolen in a data breach, they're logging into all of those things, and there's already automation on the internet that once that password is stolen, it's sold on the dark web, and some machine grabs it and tries to log into the cacophony of services that are out there. So if you lose your eBay password, they immediately tried to log into your Chase account, your eBay account, your Amazon account, and on and on and on. And once they find that they can log in and you don't have multi-factor authentication enabled, they sell that access back into the dark web so they can actually come steal your money. So now think about that ecosystem, and it's existed for years. Credential stuffing has been around for how long?
Past and present.
Like, now put AI on top of that. Who remembers the Nigerian print scam? Right? Like, well, now it's not that. Like, the broken English and the way you would detect those types of threats, like, AI is now smart enough to go read your social media, who you're friends with, who you write to, how you write, and craft a message and put it together in a very compelling way that, like, this may be your friend. This may sound like someone you would want to talk to. And so another threat that's connected to passwords is spear phishing. Phishing, like, these types of things are still part of that user awareness training that we heard a little bit about, and it's Cybersecurity Awareness Month. We're fighting the same problems, and AI is making it worse because there's no governance or compliance requirements for operators to take advantage of these technologies. Most of you have heard about deep fakes and things like that, and what that means. Well, all that means is that everything that you remember or know about contextual authorization, I know this is the person that I believe and trusted as is about to be broken. Is already being broken right now. And so what that means for the future is that the way you run your businesses today, as from an enterprise risk management perspective, the way you authorize your customers into your accounts to prevent fraud is largely based on their PII, their contract information, and what they've registered. Well, all of us have suffered breaches through time. They certainly have lost all of their PII data. I mean, how many letters have you gotten about your stuff being stolen? Well, we're asking questions of stuff that we know has been stolen of our customers to authenticate them. And so the attackers have access to that, and they're now smart, and AI is helping power it.
So we have to be prepared. Cybersecurity and preparedness. And what I can tell on this first picture as we deconstruct your history, right?
Yeah.
It looks like in case of emergency, break glass.
Yeah.
What's going on in that
This
picture?
is another great war story. So it's 1999. Who remembers? For the students won't remember, but who remembers Y2K, the great coding disaster, right? Well, actually, it wasn't a disaster, but it was a great example of are you actually prepared, and our dependency on technology, and what would happen if the bank shut down and planes fell out of the sky. Well, we were dealing with that too in terms of what it meant to conduct warfare. And it just so happened, there's lots of press articles from 1999 that in the middle of our readiness preparations for that, the Great Flood of North Carolina, the first Great Flood of North Carolina came through, and it washed out all the hog farms and stuff. It was really catastrophic. I just moved down there and had my first duty station. Well, there was 100,000 gallons of gasoline that had leaked into the ground. So you heard about the Camp Lejeune water case and all that nonsense too. It's actually not connected, but should be and probably is in just politics. But that flood pushed that gasoline that leaked in the ground into our data center. So on December 27th, 1999, I walk into my data center. It smells like gas in here. What's going on? The fire department comes over, benzene meter goes off. We have to evacuate. We have to don protective gear, and 2 days before Y2K, 2 days before the end of the internet, we have to move our entire base data center basically into the basement of our courthouse. So what are you doing for business continuity? What are you thinking about in terms of what your reliance on outsourced data centers or third parties, and is your business cyber resilient in a way to protect yourself adequately against weird cases like that?
So your business continuity plan at the time had gasoline seeping up through the ground.
Right. It did not. That's scrappiness of the Marine Corps. But man, like at a corporate institution, I wonder what would have happened. I think it's interesting.
So in the future, as we just talked about technology and AI and things that we don't even know yet, how can we be prepared? We've got our non-insurance panel all flagging cybersecurity as a top risk, right? I mean, we can't just outsource it all away. Now, that is an option, right?
Yeah.
Because we're each constrained by the situations that we're in. But how do we think about preparedness? What are we being prepared for?
Yeah, let's see. Well, first and foremost, this is where it was interesting the responses we got from the ERM team when we asked them about cybersecurity preparedness, because I have another chart that I like to show. It shows the responsibility map of the CISO and how integral to all components of the business, security, and especially, like, first and foremost, recognize that every person in this room, you're working in a technology-driven company. Like, everything runs on computers today, other than cutting up the barbecue from Omaha Steaks. But the entire business line runs, on some sort of technology platform. And so a recognition and understanding of what your reliance is between your technology platforms, how you're managing them, what you're outsourcing, your dependence on that. It is incredibly difficult with the sophistication of most modern businesses today to understand what all your second, third, and fourth party risks are, and their dependence on technologies. But as a security organization, or as a person that's managing enterprise risk, the answer is in the contract. Well, but it's not. Like, the answer is in incredibly deep diligence to those third parties and understanding what their knock-on risks are, understanding who they're dependent on for supply chain implications. You think about the crazy story we just read about with the reality that how Israel did that really interesting attack with the radios, where they put bombs in the radio system, so it blew up the Hezbollah guys. That's a very interesting supply chain implication. But does anybody know who Huawei is? Is that the Chinese? There's a reason they're banned. Like, supply chain risk has been around since the 1990s. I was dealing with that in the Marine Corps with where we were sourcing our telecommunications equipment. When do you ask questions about those kinds of risks for your suppliers? Like, what kind of supply chain implications for their systems? Cyber attackers rarely go directly front after the organization they want to go after. They go after the adjacent side channel, more weakly assured company, which puts you in the responsibility of diligence to really understand what they're doing and why. And how do you do that? It is not, part of it is in the contract to protect you. Cyber assurance and things like that are absolutely necessities. But if it's connected to your business continuity plan, which most of your business continuity events now, scenario-wise, I think are driven out of cyber events, then to get to the answer to that, you've got to go meet their CISO. You got to go have that conversation at a much more enriched level about where is your data, where are those systems, are they in a data center that's in a flood zone that you're going to have to move in a hair fire because of gasoline creeping into it?
So we got a lot we need to do. How much of that has changed over time?
Yeah.
I mean, there's got to be some basic stuff, right? That as we're thinking about maturing out programs, trying to keep pace with emerging technologies, are there new things that we should be doing, or should we be focusing on what we've learned from the past?
Yeah. I've built a career enjoying the innovation of new and modern security technology, chasing the same paradigm. Like, it comes down to those very basics and having a rich understanding of what is your technology environment, first and foremost, for those that have one. And there are lots of frameworks out there. Many of you that work in the cyber side know that ISO 27001 and NIST 853, and I frankly choose the easier one, like the Center for Internet Security Core 18. The very first thing on all of those lists is asset management. What do you have? Asking your cybersecurity guy to protect you without, like, the board question, can you give me an inventory of all of my digital assets? Can you give me an inventory of all my software assets? Can you give me an inventory of all of my core intellectual property assets and what those constitute? If you can't do those things first, then how in the world are you going to build a proper wrapper of security around that? And people seem to neglect or misunderstand that, like, the complexity of that is too hard and don't properly enforce it. And we have a tendency to lean towards the shiny objects of cyber risks, like ransomware attackers are coming at us, right? Totally, man, that's scary. I've seen that. Like, that's now commoditized and industrialized on the dark web as like fee for services. You can pay for that to have it done to you now. But first and foremost, to defend against ransomware, you got to know where all your assets are. So if an attacker gets a foothold into your environment, then you actually can assure that you have security controls on that device to stop the ransomware attack there.
So I think we heard a little bit of talking about suppliers in our last conversation, and I'm going to paraphrase. It's not if, it's when. So what part of preparedness is response?
Yeah.
What should we be thinking about from a cybersecurity response? And maybe you can use the next example here in your. It looks like you need to respond to something.
Yeah.
Picture number 2.
Yeah. Oh, so hang on before we get into that. So the pictures. So the first picture was, I told you guys the story about the Y2K event. That is one of the data center storage cabinets that as we were moving, I took the opportunity for a photo. One of my staff NCOs came over. Was like, get in that box, sir. So I jumped in there. I'm holding a CD that says, it's basically a backup CD for one of our server platforms. And that hammer is leaned up against it. There's a young Lance Corporal laying on the floor to hold that thing up, and they grabbed that photo, and it became kind of legendary for our moving the base data center in the middle of the thing. The next was my wartime deployment to Operation Iraqi Freedom. But the real preparedness for me came between these two pictures here, where in the Marine Corps, I got to stand up what they call the Cybersecurity Incident Response Center. So this is like the reality of these things are going to happen. And so the if but when statement that Tim alluded to. And so what does that mean? That starts first and foremost with a principle of visibility. I got to know, back to that asset management, what all my assets are. Can I see them? Can I instrument them? Can I collect logs about what's happening? Can I forensically analyze those systems if I have problems? And so I had an opportunity to build that for the U.S. Marine Corps and all 28 post bases and stations around the world. Got to live through the emergence of real cyber, Code Red, NIMDA, Melissa, Love Letter. You guys remember, those that have been around technology, remember those were the beginnings of the malicious worms that shut down the internet and shut down organizations. And that was kind of the birth of the industry. I transitioned from the Marine Corps, and I went to the U.S. Department of Treasury under an aerospace company called Northrop Grumman, who had a lot of work in the government verticals. And I got to build that same capability for the Department of Treasury. And like, this is where the readiness really hit home, because many of you've heard of the concept of state-sponsored attackers. What does it mean when the Russians or the Chinese or some enemy of the state comes at you? We experienced that. We experienced what it meant to see and feel like infiltration through malware introduction, making lateral movements in our environment, and stealing our emails and our papers and our context in reference to key government activities like the G20 and the G60 summits, or G6 summits. These were intentional to learn about what our position, our economic positioning was going to be as they would enter these negotiations. And so you're like, holy crap, now all of a sudden I'm like critical infrastructure to the United States. And so what does it mean to be prepared? First, it starts with expecting it to happen and laying in place a fabric or a framework for your organization to see, know, understand, and risk prioritize the types of scenarios that you care about. Having a cyber intelligence function, somebody that's thoughtful enough to understand what's going on in the world, build relationships even with your competitive peers. Because at the end of the day, as a financial institution that Delaware Life is, we're still critical infrastructure with $60 billion in assets under management, and knowing who our customers are and what they actually are relying on us for. If we go under, it's a global economic impact. So it's important that you know what your peers to your left and right are doing and what they're experiencing from a threat intelligence standpoint, so you know how to prepare yourself excuse me, for those types of events. That was a very significant learning for me to understand that you can't stop it all. That's what risk management is.
So what I think I hear you saying is what you've learned through some of the military, you're applying to your current job with Delaware Life.
Well, I think that like it was a great privilege to serve my country. The opportunities they had were incredibly unique in the Marine Corps. At the same time, what I did there is very much repeated in terms of working in critical infrastructure institutions and the types of threats and watching the emergence of new technologies and be able to connect the dots on those things. The playbook is the same. I need to know what I have. I need to get a view into it. I need to be able to understand what our business, what the business impact of that is to the disaster recovery part, and I need to know how to stop it as fast as I can.
So you've said "I" a lot. So I'm hoping you're not the only one. So we've talked about partnerships and we've talked about tone from the top. It's very fortunate that they have you, but how does the risk management community bring this back and do it as a group, as a partnership?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and frankly, I've not seen a really terrific example. It's the reason why I asked the question about third-party risk as well. If everyone says cybersecurity risk is the most important thing, and I heard one person say this is the only thing that gets updated quarterly to the board of directors, I would question, if it is the most important, are you putting enough energy into addressing the mitigating phase of the enterprise risk? And it starts very much with, do you have good, clear answers? Well, first I would say from the top, does your organization have material understanding of its dependence on technology, of who its key vendors are? Do you have good business continuity program that illustrates where these technology touch points are? Second, do you have someone in a role like this that has the competencies to be able to communicate not the bits and bytes technicals, but what it means in terms of that dependence, how technology is being managed? So much of what I do is not managing technology, but it's illuminating to the head of IT or the people that run the technology plants or deploy new technologies, making sure they don't do a bad job with that and helping giving them guidance and procedures on that. And it's incredibly difficult, frankly, to orchestrate in especially large-scale organizations, managing in the chaos, which is why that philosophy of expect the bad day to come and being prepared is still systemic in how these organizations have to prepare. How do you measure and test is what it comes down to. Can we switch over to the next slide?
While we're doing that, I mean, what an awesome space for students, right? It's every other day. I think my children show me a new shortcut on my laptop that I didn't know existed, and how much it saves my life and time.
Yeah.
So from a student perspective, this is an exciting place where technologies are emerging. You're seeing more evolving technology than we probably saw growing up. What an awesome opportunity for students to get involved in this space.
Well, it's been that way for a long time. You don't reserve this for computer science. The organizational pillar of a cybersecurity program, pillars are very deep. You start at the governance level and understanding what these frameworks mean and how to align compliance and regulatory requirements to it. The engineering is very broad, from network to endpoint to software to application design to architectural design of an enterprise. Like, there's spectrums of that to get into. There's the operational pieces I just talked to, from network surveillance and monitoring, incident response, malware reverse engineering, all the way to the far right to, if you want to be a partner in a SecDevOps world and what it means to be a security leader and instructor on a small team and partner with a cloud team that owns the outcomes of the technology it develops. I mean, it's very powerful. But to circle back to that in terms of the opportunities that are also there, on the left, I took a departure from big government scary jobs and wanted to do something at a startup, and it's back to that enterprise risk management framework. How do you assure cybersecurity works was a philosophy. I'd lived through these breaches from my time at the Marine Corps and the time at Treasury, and it was always stuck in my craw that we buy all this equipment and some of it doesn't work when it's supposed. Every breach I've ever worked, all the technology was there, the process was loosely written, or was in good shape, and we just didn't do it. So, what's a way to do that? Well, how do we test security? Well, you bring in your once-a-year pen test, you do your annual compliance audit, and we call it good, and we put on a show for that. Well, that's not good enough. That's a problem. Coming out of my experience in aerospace, there's a clear systems engineering life cycle of requirements to testing in the big V if you're a systems engineer kind of person. So I went to a startup that very much philosophically believed we now understand a lot about how cyber attackers operate, and they run a playbook. You know why they run a playbook? Because they're using software too. It's no longer the hoodie with the black hat and the guy doing the things. There's now lots of automation to power an operator, and much of that state-sponsored capability that I learned about in the 90s has now trickled out into the crimeware space. And they have no qualms with taking advantage of spyware. Who remembers Eternal Blue and FedEx? And there was a breach, I think, in 2013 or 14, where a defense contractor out of Italy who was building exploits for the National Security Agency got breached themselves. And what they were using was Windows XP and Windows 2007 vulnerabilities that had not been disclosed to Microsoft to be patched. And then they turned around and weaponized them. And within 3 days of that release, all these new exploits came out. Ransomware events were born. And so if you don't test your security in a good way, in a continuous way, how do you know it works? So philosophically, I joined this startup, which was very focused on taking this body of knowledge, this framework that's out there that explains how these cyber attackers work, anchoring that to your security technologies that you put in place, and every day emulate adversary behavior. Be the attacker all the time, and that will be the scorecard that I want to take to my enterprise risk committee to show that my security actually works. It's a material investment. It's a different paradigm. It certainly costs more. But if you don't do that, then you spend all the money on the stuff and you still get breaches because you weren't using it right.
Marie had said earlier, if you put a snack in your purse, right, you're a risk professional, right? If you worry a lot, you're a risk professional. If anybody doesn't sleep at night, you're probably a cybersecurity person, right?
This beard is gray for a reason.
I don't know. It sounds like a lot. I know we've got about 20 minutes left. Do you have a couple other highlights you want to hit? Or I really hope we get some questions.
Yeah, I hope so too. And I hope this is fun and different. I have a story about, and it's again back to the contingency and other kinds of risk we don't think about. Reputation risk is really important, obviously. You may not lose something monetarily, but with the nature of social media today, when the internet turns against you, it can. Somebody mentioned Citadel earlier today in terms of moving down to Miami. I was at Citadel as their CISO when that decision was made. I was also there when, if those that watched the GameStop meme stock dumb money movie on Netflix, Citadel was the perceived bad guy, and that they told Robinhood to take the buy button away because they were the financial transaction processor for Robinhood. And so what do you think that meant when the internet, who has bought into this easy money GameStop thing, turns against you? And I can tell you, the kinds of experiences I had with defending the brand and the organization, it was incredibly complex and difficult. And so a breach is one thing, and having to send those letters to your customers, say, sorry, we lost your PII. It's another when someone thinks that you lost their life savings, which is particularly acute to me at Delaware Life because of who our customers are and what we do. And so brand protection and recognition as a disaster recovery event, like making sure that we're considering that as some of our key risks and understanding what it means when when the internet even errantly perceives what that means for you and how you monitor for that. How do you know what your brand perception is? That's now a security responsibility in many ways.
So without joking, so the audience, I do want you to think, and hopefully we get some questions. But I want to do the what keeps you up at night while people are thinking of questions.
Well, let's see. What keeps me up at night? I'm a big picture thinker, having sat through a lot of these kinds of roles, and I think about the evolution of technology and the way we embrace it. And I think of part of the underpinning momentum of why I went to that startup at the time that I did. We've done this wrong at the highest level. TCP/IP and the internet protocol that created the internet was built on the back of a napkin, and we allowed it to flourish, and now our entire way of living is built upon it. At some point in time, you got to tear down the bridge and build a new one, and I don't know if there's an intellectual or economic appetite to do that. So that's part one. Two, our appetite for and rapid embrace of new technology without having the intellectual wherewithal to stop, pause, and think about what that actually means to embrace it. We already are seeing the bad sides with only 10 years of use of social media and what that is done, what is that doing to our culture and the use of misinformation, what it's done to the well-being of young women and how they see themselves and all that research that's coming out now. And now we're going to force multiply that with the rapid adoption of artificial intelligence. And so there's an element that deeply concerns me at the end of the day of, like, are we working ourselves to great economic benefit and efficiency, but also great inherent risk with how our society actually interacts with each other because of technology? Cybersecurity is an undercutting theme of that because most of it's unsafe, but now these two things work together, and that what you present in social media and AI is now how we build a target list of who we're going to spearfish, and then use that to craft the letter to get into your environment, and then embarrass you with the information that we find.
So what questions do we have in the audience?
On that note,
We got one at the back right of the room facing out. Which one of these pictures is your favorite?
this one, oh, so the kilt is a pattern that I actually designed for the company, had woven in Scotland, and it tells the story about what's red teams that do testing, blue teams that do defense, and then purple. So all the colors all match. So it was really like I just wanted to wear a kilt, and it became the best marketing thing I've ever done. And I'm the security guy.
Oh, yeah.
I still wear it.
Yeah, on that note, I was in a meeting in Washington, D.C. probably about 6 to 9 months ago or so with some high-level government-type folks, and somebody made the comment about with the emergence of artificial intelligence that groups of people could effectively be as powerful as a nation-state, for instance, in the not-too-distant future, if not now. Hearing that, and part of the message was to scare the crap out of everybody, obviously, but as I went and studied it more, I don't think it's that far off. And as financial institutions, if you think about that, groups of people to get together could be effectively as powerful as Iran or North Korea or Israel, whoever, in your job, that kind of sucks, right? I mean, that's yeah. So,
that's one way to put it.
All of us, really. But thinking about that have you thought like that, and where do you think that?
Yeah, I'll give you two examples of that I think are like quite compelling. In 2011, I gave a talk at the Federal Aviation Administration on cybersecurity, what I was doing at the Department of Treasury then. And you compare the investment that's gone into technology adoption and what it means comparable to like weapon systems. So we built the nuclear bomb. It solved the World War II problem, as tragic as that was and what it meant. But the bomb itself took another 10 to 15 years before nuclear power allowed the proliferation of those kinds of weapon systems. Cyber weapons are deployed across the digital landscape the minute they're used. It means that anyone that has the wherewithal to pick them up, modify them, and hire a few developers to adopt them. So that's one piece, the speed of rapid adoption. I use that eternal blue, the vulnerabilities that were connected to that. That's exactly what happened. Like, we had weapons used for offensive purposes for government. They were allegedly, they were stolen and then immediately used by crime gangs. Second story, and we're experiencing this, I think, with much success across many industries, including the ones that I work in. Have you ever heard of pig butchering? Pig butchering is the new thing, right? Well, this is basically human trafficked people in third world countries stuffed into buildings and given a playbook to make friends with people, to build relationships, and then exploit money from them using cryptocurrency scams and things like that. You give them artificial intelligence, decoders, changers, things like that, and think about what that means for empowering fraud capabilities. Now empower that with what we know about with how much personally identifiable information that's out there from all of the breaches that have happened, where AI can help build dossiers based on these purchases from the dark web. And with a little bit of money and a handful of people and a little bit of technology, you can have a very, very big economic impact for a lot of people.
That doesn't keep you up at night?
Yeah, well, it does recently.
You got another one, Becca.
One other sort of AI-related, cybersecurity AI-related question. How close are we to, we know AI can code, and so how close are we to actually AI creating viruses and just unleashing them?
Already there. I mean, first and foremost, it's considered nearly developer best practice to allow some of the native platforms like Git, Microsoft Copilot, things like they're already there. You turn them on, you give them the requirements of what you're trying to do in a more plain language-based way, and it will certainly spit out for you, like within a framework of coding, what it can do for you. On the negative side of that, there's adversary framework software out there that you can get into where you can give it very specific. Well, first off, it's been this way for a long time, and AI is bringing, to the other gentleman's point earlier, is making it easier for people to get into the game without having the technical expertise to do it. So there was this what they call it Metasploit. It's a adversary framework for taking known exploit technologies, and it kind of was the beginning of that benchmark of testing. Like, if I can emulate or use this in my environment safely, can determine if my security would actually work against it. And so it had a purpose. It also, look, here's a toolbox of exploits that a hacker can use, and now I can script kiddie, click the buttons, and do the exact same things they can do. And so now artificial intelligence overlays on top of that, where you can apply a natural language processing, put together, to me, a ransomware exploit that harvest this information from these people's social media that involves this type of exploitation, on Windows, whatever you want to do, exploit these particular command and control channels, send the information back out this way. And you can do that in a foreign language, translated through the AI to convert to the actual delivery mechanism. And this already exists today. This is already happening. So when I say that, like, AI brings with it a set of risks in terms of scaling the cybersecurity problems we have today, it's happening right in front of us.
From our online viewers, for the speaker, given your level of awareness of personal cyber and fraud threats, what precautions do you personally take to protect your own identity, bank accounts, etc.?
Yeah, that's an incredibly difficult question to operate in the modern world, right? I could probably write a book on this, and I'm probably not the best. The first and foremost thing is think about the things you care about, right? So like, I care about my financial investments and things like that. So I'm guarded. I turn on all that stuff, multi-factor authentication, all the native security that Access provides. I do bank mobile. I have SIM swap protection on my device. I obviously turn on all the security feature sets. I spend time to understand what the new updates mean and the new security features that come out with it. I try to separate access, so if I do like PayPal and e-currency functions, I don't connect those to my core bank account where most of my money is. I have a separate bank account for those kinds of things. Social media, I'm pretty laissez-faire about. I use Facebook to share pictures of my family. I use LinkedIn to talk about where I work, and the rest I'm really not that prolific about. It's just not that important. My profession. I do run a podcast, and that's kind of fun and interesting, and I do promote that, but it's mainly to talk about my profession. But other than that, I don't live my life on a sleeve in many ways. But even the things that I do are incredibly foretelling in that, like we talked a little bit about deep fakes. So you can go pick up my podcast, deep fake my voice now. And I'm actually demonstrating that to my company of like, this is what the art of the possible is. So content validation is dead. We're gonna have to find better ways to deal with that. So I think about a lot about what you care about. Make sure you build the wrappers around that. It's just like any other risk management strategy, right? What are your backup plans if you do have an outage? Think about your home. I would encourage you as a digital citizen, the Center for Internet Security, CISA, the agency within the Homeland Security Department, has a wonderful set of personal recommendations. It used to be much more robust, and I think they've tried to make it simpler for everyone. And I think it's 4 paradigms. Patch your stuff. Every time you get the update button, hit it as quickly as possible. Employ your key rings. Don't use the same password for everything, and use multi-factor authentication. Monitor and guard your home networks because that's easy access. And be cognizant of where you are. Like if you're on an airplane or in an airport and you jump on someone's Wi-Fi, you might be jumping onto a monitored network. And it's that kind of stuff, and just digital hygiene is the most important thing you can do. The rest is about monitoring your footprint, separating your core assets, and things like that.
Hi. I have a question. I think I'm a bit of a pessimist. I like to say realist. I have 2 daughters who are optimists, so I try and think how they think sometimes too. So I guess my question is here, from a risk professional standpoint, we look at this with a lot of pessimism. And maybe from my daughter's standpoint, like, what's the good news? Like, what is the optimistic point of view here on the thinking on how we manage this, as opposed to, the robots are going to take over and kill us? There has to be an optimistic point of view here.
Yeah,
Well.
there is, but I'm with you. And like a lifetime of these photos, I think creates that. And also, my life has been service-oriented defense, right? Like my job is to protect, and so I'm paid to protect. We can fix all of this. This is all. Do we care enough to? Do we have the discipline to? And are we willing to undertake what it takes to do it and stick to it? And so, our job as risk management professionals very much sits in the middle of helping to, set that risk threshold. We heard that term several times. So, like, unpack that. What does that mean? Is it okay to run our business not knowing what our digital assets are? And do we have good, measurable security paradigms around them? Are we actually spending enough and spending right on our cybersecurity? And like, that's a really hard question to answer. Well, what's the benchmark say? What does the Gartner guys say? Like, where the reality is you should spend on what's right for your organization based on your risk threshold that's defined. So the optimism is that we're smart enough to deal with it, and we'll soon be empowered with artificial intelligence to force multiply that too. It's a matter of, will we?
So I like that. So we just talked about all the bad things that the bad guys can do with the new technology. And previously, and I think our next topic jumps into AI, but from a cybersecurity perspective, those same tools can be used to fight back. I mean, not like fight back, not hack back, but
Well, it can do that too.
but we should be able to use the power of new technologies to improve our own controls.
Of course.
Right? So
Of course. Well, and that's why I'm passionate about the industry that I'm in. Like, a big part of that observation, detect, and respond, the preparedness part of what we're talking about. Like, you overlay an AI engine on top of that to look for anomalies. Like, here's a connection event that normally doesn't ever happen, and we've seen a history of that. Like, I don't need an analyst to figure that out anymore. There's an artificial intelligence engine, and many of our technology providers are already well down that road of absolutely, we can make our detection functions, our response functions, our preventive functions much stronger and much more empowered with the use of AI. It's a big part of their roadmaps.
You know, one of those pictures, and you pointed it out. And when I first, early in my career, heard about this concept, it was something I thought was really exciting. So I'm sure our students, again, would think it was exciting.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about a red team, a blue team.
Sure.
You know, because that goes into preparedness.
Yeah.
Right? And how are they evolving their skill sets in order to kind of that defense concept? So
Yeah.
Basic 101, not assuming everybody doesn't know, what's red team, blue team?
Yeah. So red team is, well, and back to the first picture and why I went to that startup. So the red team is the really, really smart, sophisticated white hat hacker. White hat meaning he's on the good side. He's not there to actually.
We employ them.
Well, you or you can go to a third party, but yeah, you employ them to be the hacker, but don't steal anything, right? And so they're really expensive. They can be really touchy to work with. It's a little, like legally, it's kind of touchy as well. Of like how far, what are the rules of engagement? How far can the person go? And then from the security guy that's employing them, like, do I really trust this guy? Like, what's he going to leave behind? Is he going to sell this thing to someone else? You know, so that's a piece. The blue team is the person that runs the firewall, the person that runs the endpoint security controls. They're the people that, like, I run a control. It should work against these known types of threat mechanisms, and I know it works because the vendor told me so. And then this purple team it's fascinating is watching the industry evolve. The concept of the purple team is you take this catty white hat hacker who's very good at what he does and this blue team defender, and you put him in the room and like, how would you do it? Tell him. So he can make sure the defensive believe it or not, that's new as a concept. It's crazy to think about because we've obviously done this through wartime defense and like what would the Japanese do? Let's go get one of those guys and bring him over here as a defector and go interrogate him and find out what their strategy would be. But the fact that in the cybersecurity industry, that is actually a new construct introduced about 3 or 4 years ago. And so that's a really cool place to be if you're a student, like you want to, like those are career highs to be able to get into those, right? Like you've got to be a hacker, you've got to work your way through learning how technology works, what level of hacker do you want to be, what methodological approach do you want to take, or a blue team defender, you're an engineer in a company running some of these types of security platforms.
Guessing there's not a degree on hackers.
There's not a degree in hacking, but the internet will teach you plenty.
What other questions do we have? We got one up front here. Crystal.
I love all the questions. This is great.
Hi, thank you. For preparedness and continuity planning, I'm just wondering what's your ideal focus around scenario analysis, both within business processes and third parties?
That's a good question. Let me think about like how to answer that appropriately. Ideally, first, there's an element of depth that I don't think we give proper credence to. All of the business continuity exercise that I've tried to drive, we bring in some vendor to help us with, orchestrate, and all of that. But the concept of injects, like it needs to be as real as possible. That's another reason why I like the startup concept of like make it as real as possible. And can we actually emulate the activity? Could we actually disable the data center? Could we take down the core server? So that's one part. Make it as real as possible. Two is real executive buy-in. Like we're going to run a real exercise here. Now, this isn't like we're going to paper over it for compliance purpose and call that we did a thing. We're actually going to emulate this particular event to make sure we're business continuity capable, and we're going to suss out all the loose ends that come from that. So if that event ever comes, we know the plan's going to actually be as effective as it can be. Third would be, I think we need to do a lot more of it. I think the uncertainty in the world and the nature of our growing dependence on third parties and our inability to measure the security and capability of those third parties and the supply chain emergent risks that we're beginning to see that are all coming to light, and the use of AI to increase these types of cyber attacks. Business continuity needs to be front of mind and needs to be good and persistent.
So Chris, with everything being connected through technology, what do you think the probability or likelihood of a significant event in a company impacting one area?
I'm sorry. Give me a little more on that one area.
I'm feeding you here.
Yeah. Softball. Let's go.
So I think old school business continuity would go department by department in planning for the worst case scenarios. But with how everything is connected, what's the probability of a significant event just hitting HR sub-department 3?
Yeah, very low, very low. I mean, you think about enterprise class technology, large scale organizations, shared systems, likely not good segmentation between business lines or corporate lines. Like the reality is, the types of cybersecurity events that most of us are worried about right now, like the ransomware kind of stuff. It takes one person, lateral move to the right level of access. Let me step back, say that differently. The attacker's goal is not to take down the department. The attacker's goal is to elevate privilege and become an owner in the environment and take the whole thing down because they can monetize more with that. And so, like, if they could get a department, but they knew they could get more, they would wait.
So maybe we could elevate business continuity practices to a higher level. I mean, we have to execute on a department by department level, but at the end of the day, if the whole thing goes down, we have to be able to resume together.
100%.
What about how does knowing your assets help you determine what you bring back up first?
Well, that's part of what those that are in the BC sphere and do it. The business impact assessment should help you identify that. But like frankly, that's again back to the hygiene of managing cybersecurity is back to the hygiene of managing business continuity. Do you have a CMDB or a central system that identifies what all your things are? Is that clearly cataloged? Do you understand the classification level of the information? Is the severity or the requirement for enterprise grade system? Does it affect all business lines? If that's not documented, how do you even make a plan?
Got one over here in the corner, probably be our last one here.
Cliff Hughes, principal. Quick question. We've largely focused on external threats. What are your thoughts on internal?
Yeah, like you didn't see that, like Bridgewater, Citadel, these very interesting boutique financial institutions think a lot about the intellectual property of their organization and have put a lot of energy into insider threats. And so I put it number 2 pretty much everywhere I go that is in financial, because what is the secret sauce of the organization? How does it work? What is the life cycle of that information? What are your data protection capabilities around that? And I think comprehensive about it. I mean, insider threat is about people. So it starts first and foremost about at HR and in the employee life cycle. What do we know about the person that we're hiring? Are they dangerous? Are they litigious? Are they noisy about politics? Are they going to draw fire to us for some reason? High-risk roles, executives, IT admins, and things like that. You need to have a wrapper of protection around understanding what they are through their entire life cycle. You might need monitoring and surveillance capabilities at times. You have to think broadly that, like, well, who saw the article is a great example. Who saw the article? Somebody mentioned Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and their software gives them these little videos. Like, that's a company called KnowBe4. It's founded by Kevin Mitnick, one of the most prolific hackers in industry, and now he's selling security stuff. The North Koreans found a guy in their world that was a hacker that looked like an American. They seized his identity, and KnowBe4 hired him thinking it was the American. And they caught him putting some form of malware into their environment. Well, why would you go after a cybersecurity awareness company? Well, who remembers the MOVEit breach? Enterprise SaaS systems are now that underbelly of all of your business, and outsiders are trying to become insiders, put malicious software to compromise those companies so they can get to all of you. So the outsider becomes the insider in most attack scenarios, but then you also got to think about those that want to steal from you as well. And so if you don't have an insider threat program, I'd start with, like, do you have an intellectual property identification program and data you care about? Start there, figure out what you care about, and then figure out what your security capabilities need to be to defend it.
We'll go back to your company's Cybersecurity Awareness and Appreciation Week. Hug your cybersecurity people.
Yeah, hug them. They need the love for sure. The business inhibition unit,
This was not the 5 test runs that we did, but I love talking to you. I can't wait to continue this out as our relationship grows. Thank you very much for joining.
Glad to be here. Thank you all for listening. Hit me up anytime.